Hey everyone! Today we're diving into the incredible story of Joshua from the Bible. We're going to break it all down in a way that's super clear and easy to follow. Plus, we've added timestamps in the description so you can jump straight to the parts that interest you, but trust me, you'll want to stick around until the end to get the full picture. If you love exploring the Bible and deepening your faith, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people discover this content and grow in their walk with God. Stick around till the end. You won't want to miss anything. Joshua is one of the most extraordinary leaders in the Bible, a man whose unwavering faith and deep obedience to God set him apart. His Hebrew name, Yehoshua, means the Lord is salvation, a name that perfectly reflects his purpose, leading the Israelites into the promised land. Born during Israel's time of slavery in Egypt, Joshua belonged to the tribe of Ephraim, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. His first mention in Scripture in Exodus chapter 33, verse 11, introduces him simply as the son of Nun. But little is known about his early years. He likely grew up among the Israelites who labored under Pharaoh's harsh rule, witnessing firsthand the suffering of his people. Yet, he was also a witness to the incredible power of God. He saw the plagues that shook Egypt, walked through the parted waters of the Red Sea, and stood at the foot of Mount Sinai as God gave the 10 Commandments. But Joshua was not just an ordinary Israelite. His destiny was far greater. He was chosen as Moses' assistant, a trusted companion who walked closely with Israel's great leader during their years in the wilderness. Even before he was called to take on leadership, Joshua displayed unwavering faith and courage. While many of his peers wavered in fear and doubt, he remained steadfast, believing in God's promises when others lost hope. Joshua's path to leadership didn't happen overnight. It was shaped through years of service, faith, and courage. He started as Moses' trusted assistant, learning firsthand what it meant to lead God's people. But he was more than just a servant. He was a warrior, a man of deep faith, and someone whose devotion to God set him apart from the rest. His first major moment in Scripture comes when Moses chooses him to lead Israel's army against the Amalekites. With Joshua commanding the battle and Moses praying on a hilltop holding up his staff, Israel emerged victorious. This wasn't just a military win. It was proof that true leadership relies not just on strength, but on trust in God's power. But Joshua's leadership wasn't just about battle. His heart was set on God. While others came and went, he lingered in the tent of meeting, the sacred place where God spoke to Moses. Even when Moses left, Joshua stayed behind, yearning to remain in God's presence. This hunger for God would become one of the defining marks of his life. His faith was tested in one of the most pivotal moments in Israel's history. When Moses sent 12 men to scout out the land of Canaan, the land God had promised them, Joshua was chosen to represent the tribe of Ephraim. For 40 days, the spies explored the land, observing its people, cities, and abundant resources. They saw that Canaan was everything God had said, a land flowing with milk and honey. But when they returned, fear took hold of the group. 10 of the spies spread panic, warning that the land was full of giants and that Israel would be crushed if they tried to enter. The fear was contagious. The Israelites wept in despair, doubting God's promise, and even spoke of returning to Egypt rather than facing the battle ahead. But Joshua and Caleb saw things differently. Tearing their clothes in sorrow, they pleaded with the people, "If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey." Only do not rebel against the Lord. They urged Israel not to give in to fear, reminding them that God was with them, but their words fell on deaf ears. The people's fear turned to rage, and they spoke of stoning Joshua and Caleb to silence their faith. Just then, the glory of the Lord appeared before everyone, bringing judgment to the unbelieving generation. Because they refused to trust him, God declared that none of them, except Joshua and Caleb, would enter the promised land. The rest would wander in the wilderness for 40 years until a new generation arose. This was a turning point for Joshua. While others crumbled under fear, he stood firm in faith. He didn't just believe in God's promises, he trusted that God would fulfill them. His courage and steadfastness would soon lead him to his greatest calling, to bring Israel into the land they had waited for so long. After 40 long years of wandering in the wilderness, the moment had finally arrived. Israel was about to step into the promised land. But there was one heartbreaking reality. Moses, the leader who had guided them for so long, would not be the one to take them in. Because of a moment of disobedience at Meribah, God told him he would only see the land from a distance, but would never set foot in it. It was a painful but powerful reminder that even the great leaders are not above God's commands. Instead, God chose Joshua to lead his people forward. In front of all of Israel, Moses publicly declared Joshua as the new leader. With deep conviction, he spoke words of encouragement that would shape Joshua's calling. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 7 to 8, we read, "Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." It was a powerful moment. Moses, the man who had stood before Pharaoh, parted the Red Sea, and led Israel through the wilderness, was passing the mantle of leadership to Joshua. Before he died, he placed his hands on Joshua, filling him with the spirit of wisdom. The chapter of Moses' leadership had come to an end. Now, it was Joshua's time to step into his destiny. Israel gathered at the banks of the Jordan River, staring at what seemed like an impossible barrier. The river was at flood stage, its waters rushing dangerously. How were they supposed to cross? But Joshua had already learned, when God makes a promise, he provides the way. God assured Joshua in Joshua chapter 1, verse 3, "I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses." The instructions were clear. The priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant were to step into the river first. The Ark represented God's presence among his people. The moment their feet touched the water, something incredible happened. Joshua chapter 3, verse 14 to 17 describes the scene. As soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away. Just as he had done for Moses at the Red Sea, God made a way where there was none. The people walked across on dry ground, every step reminding them that their journey was led by God himself. Once the last Israelites had crossed, the waters rushed back into place. To mark this miraculous event, Joshua told 12 men, one from each tribe, to take stones from the river and set them up as a memorial. These stones would stand as a reminder for future generations, a testimony that God had been faithful to his promise. Crossing the Jordan was just the beginning. Israel's first great test in the Promised Land stood before them. Jericho, a heavily fortified city with towering walls. To human eyes, it was impenetrable. But God had a plan that would defy all logic. In Joshua chapter 6, verse 2, God reassured Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." But the strategy God gave Joshua was unlike anything a military leader would expect. No battering rams, no siege towers, just a march of faith. For 6 days, Israel was to march around the city once per day in complete silence. Armed men led the way, followed by priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant. The only sound was the steady rhythm of their footsteps and the occasional blast of the ram's horn. The people of Jericho must have watched from their walls in confusion, wondering what kind of battle this was. Then came the 7th day. This time, they marched around the city 7 times. And on Joshua's command, the priests blew their trumpets and the people shouted with all their might. Joshua chapter 6, verse 16 captures the moment. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The earth trembled. The mighty walls of Jericho, so strong and unshakable in human eyes, came crashing down. Israel rushed in, taking the city just as God had said. Jericho was not just a military victory, it was a spiritual one. God had proven that Israel's success would not come from their strength, but from their obedience and faith in Him. The city was to be completely devoted to God, its destruction a symbol of Israel's new beginning. The only ones spared were Rahab and her family because she had hidden the Israelite spies and put her faith in the one true God. This was just the start of Joshua's journey as Israel's leader. The battles ahead would test him, but the victory at Jericho proved one thing. When God is in control, the impossible becomes possible. Fresh off their miraculous victory at Jericho, Joshua and the Israelites were filled with confidence. God had handed them a great triumph, and with their faith soaring, they turned their attention to the next city, Ai. It was much smaller than Jericho, and after scouting the area, Joshua's men assured him that this battle would be an easy one. There was no need to send the full army. Just a small force would be enough, but what should have been a straightforward victory turned into a disaster. As Israel charged into battle, the men of Ai struck them down, forcing them into a humiliating retreat. The loss was devastating. Joshua, overwhelmed with grief, fell on his face before the ark of the Lord, crying out in confusion. How could this happen? Had God abandoned them? Then the Lord revealed the reason. Someone in Israel had broken His command. When Jericho fell, God had ordered that everything in the city be destroyed or dedicated to Him. But someone had taken what belonged to God, and because of this sin, Israel had lost God's favor. God's words were clear in Joshua chapter 7, verse 11. Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their possessions. With the entire nation gathered, Joshua sought out the one who had sinned. Tribe by tribe, family by family, God led them to the guilty man, Achan, from the tribe of Judah. With his secret exposed, Achan confessed. He had stolen a beautiful robe, silver and gold, hiding them beneath his tent. But this wasn't just about Achan. His sin had affected the entire nation. Because of one man's disobedience, Israel had suffered defeat. And now, justice had to be served. Achan, along with his family and everything he owned, was stoned and burned. It was a harsh but necessary punishment to restore Israel's standing before God. With the sin removed, God was with them once again. This time, Joshua followed God's precise instructions, setting up an ambush and leading Israel to victory over Ai. Through this painful experience, Israel learned a critical lesson. God's blessings and presence depended on their obedience. News of Israel's victories spread quickly, striking fear into the hearts of the Canaanite kings. Many of them formed alliances, preparing to fight against Joshua and his army. But one group, the Gibeonites, decided to take a different approach. They knew they couldn't defeat Israel, so instead of fighting, they turned to deception. The Gibeonites disguised themselves as weary travelers from a distant land. They put on worn-out clothes, carried old sacks, and packed dry, moldy bread to make it seem like they had been on the road for weeks. Then they approached Joshua and the Israelite leaders begging for a peace treaty. Suspicious but intrigued, the Israelites questioned them. But instead of seeking God's guidance, they relied on their judgment. The bread was stale. Their clothes were tattered. Surely they were telling the truth. Without consulting God, Joshua made a covenant with them, promising Israel would never harm them. 3 days later, the truth came out. The Gibeonites were not from a distant land. They were neighbors, living right amid Canaan. Joshua and the Israelites had been tricked, but there was nothing they could do. They had sworn an oath before God, and breaking it would have brought judgment upon them. Instead of attacking, Joshua made the Gibeonites Israel's servants, woodcutters and water carriers for the house of God. This moment was a painful reminder that even great leaders can make mistakes. Joshua was strong, faithful, and courageous, but in this instance, he failed to seek God's wisdom. The lesson was clear. No matter how obvious a decision seems, seeking God's guidance is always essential. As Joshua continued to conquer the land, one of the biggest challenges came when 5 Amorite kings united to attack the Gibeonites. Because of their treaty, the Gibeonites called on Israel for help. Joshua didn't hesitate. He led his army on an all-night march and caught the enemy by surprise at dawn. The battle was fierce, but God was fighting for Israel. As they struck down their enemies, God sent hailstones from the sky. More enemy soldiers were killed by the hail than by Israel's swords. But the battle wasn't over. The sun was beginning to set, and Joshua knew that if darkness fell, the enemy might escape. He needed more time. And so, in a moment of bold, unshakable faith, Joshua did something no one had ever done before. He asked God to stop time. Standing before his army, he prayed, Joshua chapter 10, verse 12. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon. And the sun stood still. For an entire day the sun did not set, giving Israel the time they needed to win the battle completely. It was a moment unlike any other in history. God literally paused the movement of the sun and moon to secure Israel's victory. With this victory, Joshua continued his conquest, defeating the remaining Canaanite kings. One by one, the enemies fell, and Israel took possession of the land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joshua's journey as Israel's leader was filled with challenges, some brought on by the enemy, others caused by his own people's failures. But through every battle, every mistake, and every miraculous victory, one thing remained constant: Joshua's trust in God. Whether facing a devastating defeat, being deceived by an enemy, or witnessing the sun stand still in the sky, he never wavered in his faith. His leadership was not about military skill or personal strength. It was about obedience, courage, and an unshakable belief that God's promises would always come to pass. Through Joshua, Israel learned that victory comes not from human effort, but from trusting in the one who holds all things in his hands. And because he remained faithful, God fulfilled his promise, giving Israel the land they had waited for so long. After years of battles, victories, and unwavering faith, Joshua had finally conquered the land of Canaan. The promise God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was now a reality. Israel had a home. But Joshua's work wasn't finished just yet. There was still one final responsibility before his mission was complete: dividing the land among the 12 tribes. God spoke to Joshua with a reminder of how much had been accomplished and how much remained. You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. The major battles had been won, but there were still pockets of resistance scattered throughout the land. God reassured Joshua that he would drive out the remaining enemies, allowing each tribe to fully claim their inheritance. Following God's command, Joshua began the process of distribution. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh had already been granted their land east of the Jordan River, as Moses had promised them. The remaining tribes were assigned their portions west of the Jordan through the casting of lots, a process guided by God. Caleb, Joshua's longtime companion and fellow spy, personally requested Hebron as his inheritance. Now 85 years old, Caleb boldly declared, "I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out." Joshua honored his request, and Hebron became his. The Levites, who were chosen as priests, did not receive a specific territory like the other tribes. Instead, they were given cities scattered throughout the land, as their true inheritance was the service of the Lord. With fairness and wisdom, Joshua ensured that every tribe received its rightful portion. But he also understood that justice was essential in this new land. That's why he established cities of refuge, places where those who had accidentally killed someone could seek safety from revenge. These cities were a sign of God's mercy, ensuring that innocent blood would not be shed in anger. Finally, with the land divided and the people settled, Joshua dismissed the tribes to their new homes. The long, exhausting journey of conquest had come to an end. Many years passed, and Joshua grew old. He had lived through the days of slavery in Egypt, witnessed the plagues, walked through the parted Red Sea, fought in countless battles, and led a nation into its promised home. Now, sensing that his time was near, he gathered all of Israel at Shechem, the same place where God had made his covenant with Abraham generations before. Standing before the people, Joshua spoke with the authority of a leader and the heart of a father. He reminded them of everything God had done, how he had delivered them from Egypt, led them through the wilderness, and given them victory after victory in the promised land. But he also gave them a warning. Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or the left. He knew that Israel's greatest danger was not the enemies they had fought, but the temptation to follow the false gods of the Canaanites. He warned them, "If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, his anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you." Then Joshua issued a challenge that would echo through history. "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." It was a defining moment. The people, stirred by Joshua's words, responded with a passionate commitment. "We too will serve the Lord, because He is our God." To seal their promise, Joshua set up a large stone under an oak tree near the sanctuary of the Lord. He declared, "This stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us." This wasn't just a symbol. It was a reminder that they were bound to their words before God. With that, Joshua dismissed the people, and a new chapter in Israel's history began. Not long after, Joshua, the great leader of Israel, died at the age of 110. He was buried in Timnath-Serah, in the land of Ephraim, his inheritance. The Bible records something extraordinary about his legacy. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. This means that as long as Joshua and those who had followed him were alive, Israel remained faithful. His influence was so strong that even after his death, the people continued to walk in obedience. At the same time, another powerful event took place. The bones of Joseph, which had been carried from Egypt for generations, were finally buried in Shechem. This was a moment of fulfillment. God had kept his promise, bringing his people into the land he had sworn to give them. Joshua's story is one of faith, courage, and complete trust in God. He was more than a warrior. He was a man who listened to God's voice and led with wisdom. Under his leadership, Israel moved from wandering in the wilderness to standing in the land of promise. His final words remain as powerful today as they were then. A call to unwavering faith, a challenge to serve God with our whole hearts. "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." If you found this video valuable, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps share God's word with more people. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss out on powerful biblical teachings. Thanks for watching, and until next time, God bless you.